On behalf of the Holocaust Memorial Resource and Education Center of Florida, I am very happy and pleased to welcome you here today. Today's actually our second of a series in our Strategies for Action. Today is Ally or Accomplice, Multiple Pathways to Racial Justice. And, you know, these programs would not be possible without generous philanthropic support. And our friends at United Arts know and understand our mission, the importance of our efforts. And so something that's really exciting that we wanted to announce before we get started is that from now until September 15th, United Arts has actually said that they will provide a 15% match on any donations to the Holocaust Center. So we actually made something that was really easy for you all. If you're so inclined, you could just text the letters SFA, that's for Strategies for Action. You can text it to 91999, and don't worry, we'll put this in the chat box and we'll also send an email about it. But texting SFA to the number 91999, and you'll receive a link in which you can donate. And this allows us to keep these conversations going and to keep change happening. So anyway, thank you all for being here. As you see, I've already shared my screen. So since I'm one of your presenters today, usually I just introduce the presenter, but I'm one of your co-presenters. So we'll just kick it off. We'll have some introductions really briefly, but I do want to let you know that this is a starting point, right? Today is not about answering every question. It's actually about having us all think about more questions and how we can be better allies and accomplices in this. And so a little bit about us. So I'll start and then I'll turn it over to my co-facilitator. My name is Rachel Lucy Hitt. I am the education director here at the Holocaust Center. I'm hoping that I had a chance to meet many of you prior to the pandemic. I actually started in September, which was literally in the middle of a hurricane. And now we're coming around close to my 1-year anniversary here, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. So I hope I didn't bring all of this on, but it's been a very interesting ride. Prior to coming to the Holocaust Center, I really need to do the math on this, I think about 13 years working in higher education, very specifically in aspects of diversity and inclusion, everything from multicultural affairs in the student affairs realm to working in human resources or to faculty and staff development around diversity, inclusion, and social justice. And so this has always been a part of my career professionally, but also personally, some of the things, you know, that brought me to this work. And I think it's important to know about people, especially when you're coming to hear someone, to know the perspectives that we're coming from and the experiences that we're bringing, because it is just one perspective, right? But I come from a multi-faith, multi-ethnic, multi-racial household, being raised in Kissimmee, Florida, coming from New York and being raised in Kissimmee, Florida, right? There's a lot of background and experiences that come along with that. And so multiculturalism and diversity and justice has really just been kind of that common thread throughout my life, my education, even in who would have known when I was in high school, my dance team's name was Diversity. I had no idea that was like super foreshadowing of what was to come. But anyhow, those are some of the things I've done. A lot of education. I am a SEED facilitator, which is Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity. And really, this is just something that's very important and a passion of mine. And so I thank you all for coming and allowing me to not just share with you all, but I'm hoping you all can share with us as well. I am actually more of a facilitator as opposed to presenter, and so I'm used to interaction. And so this format is very odd to me. So I'm going to ask, before I hand it over to Angela, I'm going to ask that everyone make sure that you have your chat box up. So that might mean moving your mouse around a little bit, and finding that at the bottom or at the top of your screen, the chat to open that up. And why don't you just drop something in there? It could be a thumbs up. It could be letting us know who's in the room, saying hello, where you're from, because I'm hoping that throughout today that we can have as much of interaction as we can with Zoom, right? So I see there's lots of people that are commenting in there. Thank you so much. Please keep that going. And we'll have some questions throughout, so make sure you keep that up there. Angela?
Hi, everyone. I am Angela Mornside. I am an administrative coordinator for the School of Politics, Security, and International Affairs at the University of Central Florida. I have worked in various departments at UCF for the past 14 years. I'm also the Vice President of the UCF Pride Faculty and Staff Association and a member of the Orange County League of Women Voters. I was born in New York City, but I grew up as an Air Force brat, so I have lived in numerous states and even in other countries such as Turkey. My curiosity around diversity and inclusion started when I was young, as I tried to understand why people treated me differently and responded to me differently than my predominantly white peers. Because at that point in time, there were not a whole lot of kids like me in my classes or my neighborhood. Next slide, please.
Yeah.
All right. You may be wondering why we chose the topic, multiple pathways to racial justice. I'm sure that we've all seen the multiple marches and the wave of social change that occurred in the wake of George Floyd's death. He may have been the tip of the iceberg, but as is usually the case, there's far more beneath the surface. Right now, there are a lot of people who are looking for ways to be involved in supporting racial justice, and we wanted to give them some framework and concrete examples. Please know there is no right or wrong way for us to work together towards this common destination. Next slide, please. Some are posting on social media. Some are protesting in the streets. Some are donating silently. Some are educating themselves. Some are having tough conversations with friends and family. A revolution has many lanes. Be kind to yourself and to others who are traveling in the same direction. Just keep your foot on the gas.
And actually, before we go on to terminology, thank you so much, Angela, for starting us off with that. This is, it's in the title, and really one of like the biggest points that we need to talk about, in that there's no one right way. This actually often happens to us even in activism circles, right? People that consider themselves allies and are doing the really good work. But we tend to think that we know best, right? And that we know what is going to be most beneficial and what is going to make real long-lasting change. And the fact of the matter is, we really need to have this multi-pronged approach where we're doing some short-term, we're doing some long-term. And one story or thing that comes to mind for me is when I worked in higher ed. I worked in, one place I worked was with multicultural affairs, worked with students that were coming from underrepresented backgrounds, right, at a small, private, predominantly white, affluent institution. And I would get some people saying like, what's the point? Why are you working, with underrepresented students in making sure that they can be successful? Like, that's wonderful, but that's not helping in the long term, right? That's not changing the systems that are in place that are creating barriers for people in the first place. And I absolutely agree with that. But I also think that both are necessary. So there's what I consider like a Band-Aid, right? Band-Aids are important. When somebody is hurt and somebody needs help right now, somebody has barriers in front of them, we need to do whatever we can to bring down those barriers, right? To create that Band-Aid. At the same time, either I or somebody else, right? Because maybe I'm really busy doing this work, this Band-Aid work. We need other people that are looking into the future and looking how we can change all of these systems that are around us to make it better for future generations, right? And so where some people will say, don't focus your time on that, it's not worth it, or don't go protest in the streets, or, you know, you're just using your money to support. All of those things are actually important, but they need to be important together, right? So super important to remember that throughout what we talk about today. And so the first thing, just really quickly, just since this is in the title, right? We have ally and accomplice. I think ally is something that probably many of you are very familiar with. Straight out of the dictionary, an ally is one that is associated with another as a helper, a person or group that provides assistance and support in an ongoing effort, activity, or struggle, right? If we think of that in terms of social justice realms, we're usually thinking about people that maybe are not a member of a marginalized group, or the particularly the group that is being oppressed in that moment, right? It doesn't mean that we don't have other marginalized identities, but in any particular instance, it may not be our identity that is being targeted at that moment, but that we are being there as supports, right? We are being there, hopefully, to use the privilege that we have to help bring down those barriers for others. Excuse me. So there's really nothing wrong with the term ally, but this other term accomplice comes up. And so I want to know, since you all have your chat boxes up, I want you to type in there, and I'm actually going to open my chat box up too. I have to do a couple other things to make that happen. But when you hear the word accomplice in association with social justice, what are the first things that come to mind? Whether it's a definition or if it's how it makes you feel, what is it that first pops into your brain or your heart? And let me pull up my chat box so I can see it too. So pejorative connotation, partner, with crime, right? Enabler, feel empathy for. It's scrolling really fast, so I'm trying hard, everyone. Working together. But I do see a lot of this negative connotation with it. I do see deeper connection, deeper association, helper, participant in wrongdoing, right? And that's actually what similar to what Merriam-Webster comes up with, right? One associated with another, especially in wrongdoing. First of all, it doesn't have to be associated with wrongdoing. That is the association that we make. I want to talk about it in two ways. One is in relationship to how it has kind of evolved from this term ally. Because I think, first of all, there will be some people that say ally is a horrible word or accomplice is a horrible word. You're never going to get everyone to agree on everything. But I think it's important for us to know why some people feel more comfortable with one or another, right? And you can make your own decisions on terms that you use. I still personally use ally quite a bit, but some people don't like ally because it has become really stale. It has become really stagnant. It has almost, it's been used so long and by so many people that have not actually put the work into it. It's become something that has been so separated from the action and the work that it's something that, it's a label that I put on myself, right? I'm an ally, I mean well, I'm gonna call myself an ally, but what have I really done to show that? What have I really done to make sure that my struggle is embedded with another's, right? And so it's kind of just become ineffective. Just as in, you know, language and vocabulary evolves over time, especially in diversity and inclusion. And a lot of allies hate that because, right, we don't want to say the wrong thing. We don't want to do the wrong thing. But so we complain about how, like, well, how do I know which word to use or what's going to offend someone and what's not? Well, that in and of itself is an example of how the job of an ally or an accomplice, we'll get into that in a second, is not about judging, right, or placing judgment, or what my opinion is how someone should identify or what language within activism work should be used. Words are really, really important, but the actions need to be able to back it up. So some people see ally and accomplice as a hierarchy, right? As in, an ally's great, it's a first stage, but when you really get into it and you're really embedding yourself in the work, then you're arm in arm and you're accomplices. Sometimes I think about it as in, I do ally work and accomplice work in different ways, right? At the exact same time. But the important thing is not to judge one another with it. I have to be really honest, when I first heard the word accomplice, I didn't like it. My immediate reactions, and I always try to be really transparent, my immediate reaction was that this is going to be associated with crime. It's going to sound bad and negative. And it's interesting because something I saw on Facebook got me thinking a little bit differently. And that's another thing with ally and accomplice work. A lot of people think that it has no activism, should not be on the internet. I disagree. I think that's just one more pathway, right? And that none of these should be the only way. So this is what I saw one day. Apartheid was legal. The Holocaust was legal. Slavery was legal. Colonialism was legal. Legality is a matter of power, not justice. That last line, right? Legality is a matter of power, not justice. Now, this is not me telling you to go out there and break every law, right? This is not me endorsing or condoning anything. But it's that I think we need to question whether laws equal ethics and morality, right? Laws change for a reason.
And usually because of action.
Yeah, and always because of action. Thank you, Angela. Always because of action. And so we need to not rely on that as the litmus test, right? We need to see about what is unjust, what is going on, and figure out ways. And it may be very different for each of us because of our personalities, because of the circles that we travel in. It may look very different, but it must be done. And just very quickly, I wanted to show you this. This is actually just a small piece out of a paper. I would actually suggest, if you're all interested in reading this, it's on the website Indigenous Action. So I put that there in the corner. It's a paper, Accomplices Not Allies, Abolishing the Ally Industrial Complex. And the further is from an indigenous perspective and provocation. Now, when you read this paper, you may love it, you may hate it, you may agree with everything, you may disagree with everything, but I guarantee you it'll get you asking questions and thinking about things slightly from a different perspective. This paper is actually, I wanted to highlight it because oftentimes, whether it's with language, whether if it's with, anything to credit people, oftentimes people of color may be people in the background that will voice something or create something, and then others will take the credit for it. Or they just get whitewashed out of history. And so utilizing the terminology of accomplice actually comes from, or originates from this paper, at looking at it from an indigenous perspective and talking about how good, well-intentioned allies, like myself, right, may not actually be having the same impact that we believe we are, and may actually be causing more harm or contributing to these systems of oppression without realizing it. And so they break into categories, different kinds of allies that kind of we all need to read about and check ourselves a little bit. Just as an example, one that I fall into, this bullet point on academics and intellectuals, right? I said before that a lot of my justice work came out of doing this within higher education. And I did it because I cared. I cared about people. I cared about my students. It was definitely not because of the paycheck, if you know anything about higher ed. I put all my time into this because I cared about people. And then when I read this description of how many people in higher ed are not actually helping in doing this work, I got really defensive. That's a pretty natural, normal reaction. But I needed to read to understand why. And it started describing things like, you know, academics and intellectuals, like, we're very separated from the issues, and that we talk a lot about unlearning oppressive behavior, right? Which is absolutely true. That's what we do, or at least that's what I do. I'll speak for myself. But we're also very fast and quick to critique, to stand on this separated box and watch what other people are doing, observe and analyze, and say what people are doing wrong and how people should be going about their activism. And yet I don't get my hands dirty in it, right? I'm not in it. I'm not with the community that I care, but I'm doing it from such a far place that I've lost sight of what the reality is. And so we need to actually read these and see, how do I fit into this? Some people may fall into exploitation and not even realize it. If you, one way they explain this, because I would never think of myself as someone to exploit, right? But they explain it in a way of, and it kind of overlaps with gatekeepers. Am I, or is my company, or is my nonprofit utilizing these struggles, even if we care about breaking them down, right? Are we utilizing these and making decisions about what is important to talk about and what is not? Are we bringing up certain struggles because we know we can, the community is responding and we can get funding for it, right? That's automatically becoming a gatekeeper as to, and prioritizing struggles, even in a very unintentional way, right? So we need to start taking a look at being really honest and open with ourselves and humble ourselves to realize that there may be a lot of holes in the work that we do, or ways that we really need to start adjusting. And that it's okay if that defensive, mechanism comes up, but don't let it stay there for too long, right? Let's take a step back, ask ourselves some deep questions, and figure out how to proceed.
All right, activating your activism. We sat and we talked for a bit to come up with some general categories of activism, though you will see some overlapping among them. The first category here is self-education and awareness. We cannot wait for or expect others to educate us. We have to seek out information about the issues and the testimonies of marginalized community members. You can do that through reading books, through news and articles, watching documentaries, or even just searching Google if you don't understand a term. But please, do not assume that any one person's story represents the entire experience or desires of the community. This area is also about self-reflection. What are your personal biases? What are the areas in your life where you have influence, and do you choose to use it or not? A handy tool that we use sometimes for interacting with others is the principles for how we treat each other. These principles come from the Valencia College Peace and Justice Institute. One example from here is, when things get difficult, turn to wonder. If you're having a disagreement with someone, you might wonder to yourself, I wonder why this person thinks this way. I wonder why I'm responding to what they're saying this way. I wonder what they're feeling right now. Because a lot of times our disagreements are just miscommunications, but we need to be open to understand one another fully. Joining affinity groups is a great way to increase your personal knowledge. I wanted to be a more informed voter, so I joined the League of Women Voters so that I could learn about the issues and the candidates from a nonpartisan perspective, but also help others to become better informed. Sometimes one of the best ways to learn is to try to teach somebody else, right? You have to understand things in a different way in order to be able to teach someone else. For civic engagement, it's important to let your values be heard. You can and should vote, but not just in the presidential elections. You know, your midterm elections are important too. You can also canvass on behalf of candidates, or you can put up yard signs. We should learn about the policies and strategic direction for local services. Do you know your local laws and mandates? Do you know what your rights are when dealing with the police? Do you know what teachers are required to or prohibited from teaching? All this information is important to know to understand your community. Relationship and community building. Now, please remember that these suggestions are not universal. Everyone has different preferences, and a lot of this will depend upon your relationship with the people you're interacting with. If you see something wrong, speak up. Sometimes a person will reform when called out on their behavior. Though not always, so do pick and choose carefully. You know, your personal safety is important as well. There are many ways to amplify marginalized voices. For instance, I worked someplace where my ideas were frequently dismissed, but when my white colleagues would say the same thing, it was well received. One of my colleagues started seconding what I was saying, and suddenly my ideas were much more welcomed. You can also use social media or word of mouth to encourage others to listen to the voices of marginalized people. Now, during a time of unrest, it's perfectly okay to check in on your Black friends, but please do not make assumptions. After there were several violent incidents, someone asked me how I was doing. And when I said that I was physically and emotionally drained, they launched into a speech about how this must be a really difficult time for my people. I get that it was very well intentioned, but the issues that I was having at that point in time dealt with several relatives being diagnosed with cancer within a couple weeks of each other. I personally did not have the ability at that point in time to focus on yet another unarmed Black person being killed. Unfortunately, it's a common occurrence. Now, we should also seek genuine ways of expanding our circles. You never know at first glance who might give you a lesson of a lifetime or become your best friend. And it's important to be open to new people and new experiences. Financial commitments. Choose to spend your money with businesses and organizations that align with your personal belief. Research what companies have frequent issues with Black customers or racist hiring strategies. Are you against big game hunting or deprogramming gay people? There's some restaurants you probably want to avoid. There's an app called Boycott. It scans barcodes and will give you information on the company that makes that product to help you make an informed decision right there in the supermarket. And if you choose, you can intentionally seek out Black-owned businesses and anti-racist organizations to support. Next slide. When I participated in the Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity program, I learned firsthand how valuable personal testimony can be in illustrating issues. Thus, I would like to share an experience I had earlier this year. I had a friend, and rather than respond to any emails or posts she didn't understand, she would just ask me any and every question she had about anything that was Black or gay, including events hosted by organizations I'm not even a part of. You know, I tried to be patient because, let's be honest, she's trying to learn. I get that. But frankly, it's really tiring, you know, being my own spokesperson, much less having to speak on the behalf of two communities. It was exhausting and frustrating at times. I bent it in a way that really hurt her feelings. But we came to what I thought was an understanding. However, the behavior continued and ultimately led to the end of that friendship because she felt my distracted response to her questions was disrespectful. Now, at first, I was really upset. But when I thought about it, I realized just how much time and energy I had been putting into that relationship. How carefully I always had to choose my words so not to offend or hurt feelings. You know, I get it. When we don't know the answers, it's very tempting to just ask someone. But, you know, instead of taking the time to do research or Google, you know, I get it. There are times and places in situations like this one where questions are welcome and encouraged, but I don't always want to be someone's primary source of all information. My experience and knowledge base is not representative of the entire gay and or Black community, and having to be that spokesperson is an emotional tax that I don't always feel like having to pay. You know, and in the graphic here, you can see a visual representation of what it can be like sometimes to be put in these situations where we have to help people, you know, kind of work through their issues, you know, such as, you know, where it talks about clarify that you're not entitled to my time, you know, like I did not work for her. I was not her personal assistant, but she frequently treated me as though I was. And that really put a strain on our relationship, which unfortunately it ultimately couldn't bear. Next, Rachel.
And actually, real quick before I progress the slide, I did want to mention the fact that, you know, asking questions, and I know we'll go into this a little bit more later, right, is great. But understand the context of relationships too, and needing to understand that that one question may have actually happened like 10 times already today, and that people are coming from different places, and we're bringing with us so much to the table. And so what I like to think of, and I know I say this a lot, but when someone is willing to educate me, share parts of their experience, that this is a gift to me. They didn't have to do that. I could also learn in other ways that didn't require someone to take a piece of themselves, right? And that emotion and stress that goes along with it. But maybe in that instance they did. And if so, I beg of you to treat that as a gift, and not an expectation. And so if we just look at, I want to make sure that we also have time at the end for questions, and Angela has actually a lot more to share about some different routes, excuse me, to take. If you happen to have a sheet of paper, wonderful, participate along. If not, what I'm actually going to do, we were going to send out an email immediately after this presentation with, you know, a survey and other information. I'll probably pause on holding that out just for a moment so that I can also attach some things, so that if you want to do some of this work at home, you have some like attachments or some links. And I know a lot of you have been requesting some of the information in the chat box that we've been referring to. We'll make sure that you have a list of some of the links that we've mentioned. So please don't worry about that. But if you happen to have a sheet of paper, wonderful, draw a circle in the center, and that will be you for today, right? Or me. Although I don't usually advocate for making yourself the center of everything, in this case we are. You probably have seen this kind of, you know, image before. It can be used in many, many different ways. Oftentimes I will use it for talking about circles or our multicultural selves, where we may put ourselves in the center and then look at all the different aspects of identity that I have around it, which obviously is more than 6, but it's just a starting place. But today, I want us to think about it as spheres of influence or interaction, what are places or people that I interact with on a fairly regular basis, or I have some sort of influence or communication with. And I'm actually going to open up I know you can't see it, but open up my chat box so that I can see. I want to know, what are some of the things that you would use to fill out your circle, right? Here are some things, I mean, not necessarily for me, but some things that people could put in. For example, maybe you have children. That is such a place, right? Such a place of influence and interaction. Maybe you are very friendly with your neighbors, or you are a member of some faith organization or a social club, definitely work. And this, not necessarily places where you feel you have power per se, although I would argue that people usually have more power than they think they do. But in the chat box, write some other examples of places that you have this kind of interaction with. And I think it's not only helping you to think through some of these, right? And some people are saying, you know, family, synagogue, community, professional team. This also helps others, right? Because sometimes it's hard for me to think of, like, I don't really do much. I don't really interact with that many people. But sometimes even listing, right, college alumni spaces, the salon. These are sometimes places that we don't necessarily think of immediately until, thank you all for sharing things in the box there, synagogue and work, lots of different folks walking on the beach, right? These are all places that we can have interaction, charitable groups, absolutely. And as you can see, I added in that online social media space, because even though some people think activism should have no place there, like I said, I disagree. We just need to be very cautious in how we interact, and also acknowledge what our strengths or triggers are in that, because sometimes it's not a safe place to be for us, but we have to be able to make those decisions for ourselves. Learning center, parent groups, women's groups. Oh my gosh, there's so many. I love this. My favorite local brewery. Absolutely. If that's a place that you go to and you communicate with one another, absolutely. You can keep them coming in. I'm gonna just add some other, just as examples, different social groups, professional organizations, if you're in a PTA or possibly have some kind of mentoring relationships. We need to think about these because, first of all, not because this is the only place that you should stay. I absolutely think that we need to learn and we need to grow and we need to stretch and absolutely put ourselves in different environments and situations, especially when expanding our diversity of circles and friends. But I want to make it clear that I think this is a really, really good place to start, right? This is like the low-hanging fruit. This is where you're interacting in the first place. So why not start there, since you already have some sort of either comfort level or relationship with people? This is a good place to start. Oftentimes, I see when people think I am going to take a huge leap and go into, like, not even start with anything that I know and only do notice I said the word only do the things that are uncomfortable and stretch, and I don't know anyone and I feel like my skills aren't coming out and all of these pieces. What usually happens is people either become overwhelmed, think, oh, this is too big of a problem, too big of an issue, how I can't make a difference in this, or it's not sustainable. You can do it for a short period of time, but justice work is not something that happens overnight. And we need to be able to, if we're really being, right, allies and accomplices in this, we need to be in the work ongoing. Not when we pick and choose, not as some of the other categories, being parachuters, right, or floaters in and out of circles. This is something that we're in it for the good, the bad, the long haul. And so I always suggest starting in these groups of comfort or where you already are interacting, and then add some to it, right? Always stretch and grow, But let's start with some of those. So if we're looking at it and we kind of combine it with what Angela was talking about, you can start taking one of your circles, one of your spheres of influence, and then seeing what are some of the possibilities across these different categories. And also, I don't know if you remember when Angela showed you these 4 categories, personal education and awareness was one side, and then the other 3 were listed. It was as large as the 3 combined. And it was side by side for a reason, because personal education and awareness is not a checkbox. It is something that we should be doing all the time as we are engaging in these other areas, right? If you do one or the other, we are 100% missing the point. The second we think we're experts in something, especially like diversity, inclusion, and justice, is exactly when we become the example of why allies are looked at as stagnant and not supportive and really helpful, right? So take one of these areas and go across this chart and see what are some ideas, right? This is not the be all end all. These are literally just a couple ideas. So in the realm of working, you have children, like you always need to make sure you're identifying your own biases and triggers. That is a inward looking. We must understand ourselves as we're working with other people. An example of a resource, which part of this do your own work means not necessarily needing someone to provide a whole list of resources, although we are happy to do so and we are going to give you some. Do a Google search. You will be so surprised how many things come up in areas that you're interested in, where you can hear people share their stories, give resource lists. One example, and I'm putting this on there because it's pretty new, and I think the book comes out today. But many of you are familiar with Ibram X. Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and some of his other books. Usually one of the first things that people suggest to read. He has like on YouTube, you can search this. It's called Raising Anti-Racist Kids. And I think there is a longer name to it. But there is a YouTube video. It's like an hour long. I know that's a lot. It's probably longer than that. It is so good, right? In talking about how this impacts children. And also, like, let's be honest, it's because he has another book. And this one is for kids. It's called Anti-Racist Baby. And I believe I make no money off of this, but I believe it's in stores today. At least that's what Target told me when I, checked to find out, because I would like to get a copy for myself. It's a really good place to start in watching. Looking at civic engagement. Do I know what's going on with schools? I think a lot more people are involved now because of the pandemic. But we can take that, right, in lots of different areas. Relationship building and relationship and community building. Actually talk to your kids about race. Unfortunately, one of the things that has happened is people were under this very misguided notion that if we don't talk about race, then people will not be, then racism will go away. It's only because we talk about differences that these things happen. But actually, something that Ibram X. Kendi talks about is, no, the default is that if we don't step in and say something and have discussions, it's very healthy to do so. The default is that our kids will be, right? Our kids will be racist, whether we like it or not, because of the surroundings. We will soak it in. So we need to do things to actively work against, right? And then some other things on here, right? Decolonize your bookshelf. If you Google those words specifically, there's some amazing things that will come up as far as understanding what has been canonized in American literature, right? When we talked about history is written by the winners, by the victors, right? And so what has been deemed greats and classics has also been a part of that. It's part of the colonization of America. and it has seeped into every aspect of our lives. So we need to start being aware of some of those pieces. I'm recognizing we're running a little short on time, so I just want to show you a couple things here. Another way to approach this is have in each category asking questions, right? So as opposed to let's list out all of these things to do, the questions help us do the work in understanding so that we know how to relate who I am, where I operate, and what my strengths and weaknesses are, and how I can take all those unique aspects and personalize it for myself, right? So if I'm looking at work and we all have a different work situation, but I can ask some of these questions like, what kinds of training or ongoing dialogues do we have around inclusion? How does my organization encourage civic engagement? There are companies out there that give civic leave so that we can empower one another to be civically engaged, taking time to vote, not telling people how to vote, right? But giving people the time, civic leave to volunteer in the community so that we're not so separated, but that we are actually part of community. There's a lot of really creative things that can happen when we start asking these questions. How do people of different backgrounds and identities experience our culture? It is imperative that we do work in making sure that we have a diverse workforce and that our hiring, our pools are diverse and inclusive. But what is the culture that they're working in, right? I don't want to say most because, right, I'm speaking on behalf of things that I hear from community, and that microaggressions are so pervasive and have such an impact on how long people stay, right? On turnover, on productivity, because of all the things that we're having to deal with in addition to the actual work. And one last thing before I go to the next one. In this last slide, in looking at finances, some questions we can ask. Asking in a work situation about our policies around minority-owned businesses. A lot of companies do that. But taking it even a step further, is prison labor used in our supply chain? And that may sound like something so far out there, and I've actually gotten questions on, like, we're talking about systemic racism. What does that have to do with prison labor, right? If you haven't read, right, The New Jim Crow, if you haven't heard of Michelle Alexander or the prison industrial complex, definitely something to look into because it has direct impact and correlation with our systemic racism that we have, and privatization of prisons and the free labor that is provided. It encourages, right, mass incarceration because of the money that can be made from that. And unfortunately, when we really look at who's impacted, they are communities of color, predominantly. They're communities of color that are impacted by these policies, and it's things that we need to look at. And so that question mark at the bottom is really like, fill in your own blank. Let's do this work and see what is it about who I am that can, in correlation with these different categories, how can we make a difference?
All right. Justice for June was started by two former college roommates. This occurred after the death of George Floyd, when Autumn Gupta knew that her friend Brianna Wallace would be in pain, so she reached out to her. Gupta spent over 2 hours listening to her friend share how it feels to see racial injustice. That, in turn, helped Gupta to realize that despite being a person of color, she did not really understand the Black community and its issues. She didn't want to burden Wallace, so she sought out materials to educate herself. The two women worked together to compile a Google Doc of materials that included books, articles, videos, podcasts, and activities to help people understand the Black community and its concerns, as well as to engage in anti-racist activities. That Google Doc went viral, and they did a GoFundMe to build a website. This website has a variety of 30-day lesson plans that take anywhere from 10 to 45 minutes to complete that day's assignment. Why 30 days? Well, various research shows that it can take 30 days to form a new habit. Justice for June is a great starting resource, and most people can easily find some time in their schedule to accommodate these assignments. It may mean watching less TV or leveraging technology. For instance, one of my library privileges is that I can download free audiobooks to my cell phone. Now, instead of listening to music during my work commute or when I go for a walk, I listen to audiobooks. I love to crochet, but doing chart work while watching TV can slow me down. However, I can listen to a podcast and keep my eyes on my project. If you're committed to learning, there are ways to incorporate doing so into your life. Next slide. We tend to think of advocacy as being very visible and in your face. However, for people like me who are introverted or who have anxiety issues, attending a march or cold calling people is scary. Now, thankfully, there's lots of other ways to be involved. Some of these we've touched on before, but basically use your skills to contribute. Are you a writer? Write opinion pieces, create slogans. You're an artist? Create infographics, prepare posters for those who will march, design t-shirts. Do you have extra money? Find organizations doing work you support and donate to help their efforts. When I joined the League of Women Voters, I was not, and still am not, a content expert. However, I have experience in event planning and networking. As a member of the Leaguers in Action Committee, part of what I do is plan and execute events, organize volunteers, and even serve food and drinks. There are a lot of different ways that you can be involved in the fight for racial justice. You just have to find out what works for you.
And something that we, I really wanted, as we're closing together, this work is really, really, it can be overwhelming. It has been for myself, at least. Whether you are a person that is personally experiencing the oppression, or we're trying to be allies and accomplices and advocates and activists, either way, the work can feel so overwhelming that it pushes us to not do anything. And so one of the things that, one of the pieces that I try to remember, and this comes from the Talmud, but there's lots of something that you need for inspiration, right? And something that has always helped me is this: it is not incumbent upon you to complete the work, but neither are you at liberty to desist from it, right? I know that who I am and what I do is one piece of the puzzle, that it is not going to solve all the world's problems, but it will help in that journey. And that knowing that self-care is okay and absolutely necessary, but also recognizing that when we make choices of when to be involved and when not to, that is part of my privilege to do so, right? It's not about blame shaming or guilting me or you because of that. It is what it is, and we need to do what we need to do for ourselves to be able to continue this work. But I have to recognize that when I make choices, though, that's directly correlated to who I am and what those privileges are. But so this quote really helps me to kind of take a deep breath, center, refocus, re-energize, and to get back in there, because it's the sustainability of the longevity of this work that's really, really important. So with that, I know we only probably have about 5 minutes left. My apologies. I am so sorry. I normally do like 3-hour workshops. So thank you, Angela, for being the one to actually keep me on time in this. If there's any, questions, I think Serena, you were there to see if there was anything that people wanted to ask or comment before we do our final closing.
Thank you, Rachel and Angela, so much. I can tell, from just our short time together, I know I've learned and grown just a phenomenal amount. And I can see from so many amazing comments in the chat that everyone with us here today did as well. We really, really appreciate you both. There have been questions posted in the chat throughout your presentation, and please, I know we have very little time, but if everyone would continue to post questions into the chat if you have one at this time. To everyone with us, also please know that if you prefer to ask a question more confidentially, you can send me, Serena Ahmed, your question directly in the chat. And so Rachel and Angela, I know we can't engage with everything over the next several minutes, but I'll be saving all the questions and we can move forward with just answering maybe 2 right now. And I'll start with one asked during your presentation, which is from Ellen. And she's asking, is law considered the embodiment of cultural mores?
Not always. I think
you want to start, Angela?
it changes a lot faster than the laws change.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, I think it's definitely a meter, right? It's something that we look at. It is a moment in time, but there's always a lag in social community feelings and advocacy and what as a group we are coming to common agreement upon, and then having laws change with that. What's interesting is I see it first as coming up from the ground, from the people, in wanting change and honestly fighting for that change, oftentimes that impacting laws, but then needing to actually go back and seeing even a vocal group in enacting change, once those laws occur, then we still have some cultural work to do, right? Because that doesn't mean that everyone was along for the ride. And it also doesn't mean that everyone knows what that looks like in reality. As I mentioned, how, many people that I come across are like, obviously I'm for equality and racial justice. But then when we start looking at, well, what does that really mean? What does systemic racism look like in practice? Then it starts getting a little more uncomfortable, right? Because we need to take a look internally about how we individually contribute to things. We need to look at the prison industrial complex. We need to look at police brutality. We need to look at even, microaggressions that I myself commit even unknowingly. And so there comes this kind of like community support for laws, and then coming back around to making sure that actually culture as a whole starts shifting with it.
It's brilliant. Thank you so much. And maybe we want to just answer one more.
Sure, sorry, I know I talk a lot.
No, my God. This one's from Christopher, and I'm trying to read it here. I took a picture on my phone. How do we address intergenerational secondary trauma with American history education with such atrocities and hypocrisy? That's a big
Angela,
question.
would you like to answer, or would you like for me to?
You can go ahead.
Okay. So if I'm understanding the question, how do we actually address this, right, within the education system? Is that what I'm hearing?
And especially with attention to how do we not re-traumatize as part of that? Yeah.
So that's the thing, is trauma is really hard because it's very individual, right? We can look at things in generalities and with these kind of umbrella notions that we need to be aware of and to be cautious of, but how everything impacts is on a very individual basis. And so we're never going to get it right 100% of the time. What we can do is try to have safeguards, try to make sure that we have resources available during and after, right? That this isn't just a checkbox. We're not just going to address something one time, have that leave a lasting impact on an individual, whether positive or seemingly traumatic, which can lead to good change afterwards, right? If done well. But the thing is that we can't shy away from it because of the fear of trauma. We need to try to get experts in the room to devise ways that we can address the question that you have. The problem is what we've done oftentimes is to retract and to say we shouldn't have these conversations, or, well, that doesn't have anything to do with my particular work or discipline or topic that I teach, right? When in reality, there are connections that can be made. And this is true in much of Holocaust education too, right? There's a lot of connections that can be made in many different disciplines. But we need to educate ourselves first on not just the history, but who I am and how my own identity impacts how I teach that. So I think that's a long answer, is to say that it needs to be done directly, right? We can't dance around it. We need to absolutely incorporate, but bringing teams together so that there's multiple perspectives in the room in how to accommodate and make sure that we're being inclusive of different people, cultures, backgrounds, and experiences that are being brought to the table. So it's probably time. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. I've saved the questions, and so hopefully we can address those in other contexts.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And if anyone has specific questions for us individually, our emails are here. I want to remind you that we will be sending out an email, one, to get some feedback from you all. We would love that. Also to send out some resources. And again, sharing with you that we really want to make sure that we can continue these sorts of programs, hopefully like in person in the future at some point. The next one we have coming up is The Limits and Necessities of Never Again, The Holocaust and Injustice Today, with Dr. Danny M. Cohen and Sammy Oberman. They've been with us before, and we're bringing them back. We have if you look at our website, a whole series that you can look at for the next couple months, actually, but that we really, really rely on philanthropic support. So again, if you are willing to text the letters SFA to 91999, you'll receive a link in which you can donate, and 15% of that will be matched by United Arts. So again, thank you so much. I really want to thank my co-facilitator, Angela. It was wonderful working with you at UCF, and so I appreciate you being here today. And thank you all for coming. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.